She was married. She was my piano teacher. And in 1980, wanting her was something I wasn't even supposed to understand. Every lesson became a test of restraint. Every correction felt like a confession we were both refusing to make. Her hands taught me discipline, while her silence taught me desire. There were no safe words for what we were becoming, no future we were allowed to imagine, only music, secrecy, and the danger of wanting too much. This is the story of a woman who had a life to protect and another who had nothing to lose, except her heart. In 1980, the conservatory smelled of old wood, polished floors, and silence that demanded respect. Julia learned quickly that the most important sounds there did not come from the piano itself, but from the pauses between notes. It was in those quiet spaces that things truly happened. She was 22 when she first heard about Simone, the piano professor, 15 years older, married, childless, and, according to the whispers in the hallways, entirely unreachable. Simone did not smile easily. She wore neutral colors, tailored skirts, blouses buttoned high at the collar. Her hair was always pinned back with intention, as if disorder were something she had trained herself never to allow. There was distance in her presence, not coldness, but discipline, the kind that came from years of restraint. Julia arrived too early for her first private lesson. She sat on the piano bench, hands folded in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. When the door opened, it wasn't the sound that made her look up. It was the weight of someone entering a room as though it already belonged to her. Simone set her bag down, removed her coat slowly, deliberately. When her eyes met Julia's, they lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. "Julia," Simone said, her voice low, controlled, "we can begin." The lesson was flawless. Posture, technique, breath. Simone corrected her with precision, never wasting a word. But at one point, as she adjusted Julia's hand on the keys, their fingers touched. Brief, professional, and yet Julia's heart slipped out of rhythm. "You play with too much emotion," Simone said, withdrawing her hand too quickly for someone unaffected. "You need to learn how to restrain it." Julia nodded, though the thought felt absurd. How did one restrain something that had not yet learned its own name? Weeks passed. The lessons became the quiet center of Julia's life, not because of the piano, but because of Simone. The way she closed her eyes when Julia played a passage correctly, the faint change in her breathing when Julia dared to interpret instead of obeying the page. There were glances that lasted too long, silences that felt weighted, sentences that were never finished. In 1980, there was no easy language for women who felt drawn to other women, no permission, only intuition. And Julia felt it, deep in her chest, that something dangerous was being built, note by note. One afternoon, as the lesson ended, Simone hesitated at the door. "You have talent, Julia," she said without turning around. "But talent requires limits." Julia didn't answer. She watched as Simone left, taking something with her, something Julia could not yet define, but already missed like an absence. And in that moment, without either of them admitting it, the first invisible line had already been crossed. By the middle of winter, the lessons no longer felt instructional. They felt intimate. Simone began closing the door fully when Julia arrived. the soft click of the lock echoing louder than it should have. She stood closer now, correcting posture with quiet authority, her presence hovering just behind Julia's shoulder. Again, Simone would say. Slower. Controlled. But control was becoming a fragile thing. Julia noticed the change first, the way Simone's gaze lingered on her reflection in the piano's black surface, the way her voice softened when no one else was nearby, the way she stopped mentioning her husband altogether, as if that part of her life had learned to stay silent. One afternoon, Simone asked Julia to play something unfamiliar. Not the sheet music, she said. Something of your own. Julia hesitated. It's unfinished. Play it anyway. The melody was raw, unprotected. It rose and fell with emotion Julia hadn't learned how to hide. When she finished, the room was painfully quiet. Simone didn't applaud. She didn't speak. She simply sat beside Julia on the bench. You're not supposed to feel this much, Simone said quietly, staring at the keys. It makes people careless. Julia turned toward her. Or honest. That was the first time Simone looked at her like that, not as a student, not as a responsibility, but as a woman who had been seen. After that, everything shifted. Simone began staying after lessons, talking about music, about Europe, about the life she once imagined before choosing the one she was expected to live. She spoke carefully, but there was longing beneath every word. I chose safety, she admitted one evening. It seemed reasonable. And was it? Julia asked. Simone didn't answer. Their closeness became impossible to ignore. Fingers brushed too often. Knees touched on the bench and neither moved away. The air between them felt charged, like a held breath that never quite escaped. The first real fracture came on a rainy evening. Julia arrived late, soaked, hair loose from its careful restraint. Simone handed her a towel without thinking, her fingers lingering too long at Julia's wrist. Stay, Simone said before she could stop herself. The word hung between them, dangerous and undeniable. Julia didn't move closer. She didn't need to. You shouldn't say things like that, Julia replied softly, unless you mean them. Simone stepped back as if struck. This is wrong, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're my student. I'm married. I know, but you feel it too. Silence stretched between them, thick and trembling. When Simone finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think about you more than I should. That confession changed everything. They didn't touch. They didn't kiss. But something irreversible had already happened. Because once desire is spoken aloud, it stops being a secret and starts becoming a choice. And Simone was no longer sure which terrified her more. The first time Simone touched Julia deliberately, it wasn't romantic. It was desperate. Her hand closed around Julia's wrist in the empty hallway after a late lesson, fingers trembling despite her composed expression. Don't come tomorrow, Simone said. This has gone too far. Julia searched her face. Is that what you want? Simone released her immediately, as if burned. It's what I need. Julia nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. Loving Simone had taught her something already, that pressure only made people retreat. She didn't come the next day, or the one after that. The absence was louder than any confession. Simone tried to return to her life, to dinners where conversation felt scripted, to a marriage built on politeness and shared routines. Her husband noticed her distance but mistook it for exhaustion. He had no language for the kind of absence she carried. At night, Simone dreamed in music. She dreamed of Julia's hands on the keys, of unfinished melodies, of the way Julia looked at her, not with expectation, but recognition. 3 weeks later, Simone broke. She showed up at the conservatory after hours, knowing Julia practiced late. The building was dark, nearly empty. One classroom glowed at the end of the hall. Julia was there. She didn't look surprised. "I knew you'd come," Julia said softly, without turning around. Simone closed the door behind her. "I can't keep pretending this isn't destroying me." Julia stood, finally facing her. "Then don't." The space between them collapsed. This time, when Simone reached for her, Julia didn't hesitate. Their kiss was slow, reverent, like something sacred they had been denied for too long. It wasn't hunger, it was relief. Simone pulled back first, forehead resting against Julia's. "I can't promise you a future." "I'm not asking for one," Julia replied. "Just the truth." That night changed everything. And still, the world remained unchanged. In 1980, love like theirs did not come with protection, only consequence. Simone left her husband quietly, not for Julia, at least that's how she explained it to herself, but because staying had become unbearable. The separation was polite, restrained, devastating in its own way. But the scandal came anyway. The conservatory found out. Simone resigned before she could be asked to leave. Her reputation softened by discretion, but never restored. Julia transferred schools, her talent intact, her heart altered forever. They met one last time at a train station, coats heavy against the cold. "I don't regret you," Simone said. "Neither do I. I think you taught me how to listen." The train arrived. Simone boarded without looking back. Years later, Julia would play that unfinished piece again. She would finish it this time, and every time the melody softened, every time the silence stretched just a second too long, she thought of Simone, of restraint, of courage, of a love that existed briefly, fiercely, and honestly, like the final note of a song that never truly fades.